Okay, good evening, everyone, and welcome to what is our penultimate webinar, not just of this season, but, well, I guess of ever. So it's our second to last one next week, webinar number 99. So as usual, if you're all here, just let us know in the chat who you are, where you're studying, if you are studying, or which area of social work you're working in, if you're working, if you're a practice educator, or whatever. And remember to set your chat settings to everybody as well. I think maybe by default it's on hosts and panelists, so that will only go to us, the people that you can see on the screen. So yeah, set them to everybody so your messages don't get lost. I'll move on quickly-ish because we've got a lot to get through. And tonight's topic is, as you can see on the screen, advice to our younger social work selves. So also while you're in the chat, just let us know what your advice would be if you could go back and start again, and for all of the new social work students that we've hopefully got along watching tonight, so they get a bit of a head start. And that kind of leads me into why I'm here opening up tonight, because my advice to my younger social work self would be to step outside of my comfort zone. And yeah, as early as possible, I would say. The earlier you do it, the sooner you'll have the confidence to keep doing it. I always used to be terrified by the idea of opening up a webinar, but I thought I'd better practice what I preach tonight. So yeah, a little bit out of my comfort zone, but it's okay. And yeah, so that would be my advice. But I also asked the head of division at my university, who's been a social worker for a while now, what his advice would be. So this is Andrew Richardson. And he said that my advice to my younger self would be to see the capacity to bear the anxieties associated with not knowing as an important skill in social work practice. So in theoretical terms, he said that this is termed negative capability. He says the notion of negative capability refers to the capacity to be capable of being in uncertainties, mysteries, and doubts without any irritable reaching after facts and reason. So essentially what he's learned from that is that people don't want or need an all-knowing social worker, but rather someone who's prepared to be alongside them on their level and go through their struggles and not know together. And with that advice done, I'll pass you on to Siobhan, who's going to tell you about her bit of advice.
Thank you, Kai. Smashed that opening up. That was brilliant because Kelly normally opens. So what we've done is swap it round tonight. So following your advice, you've gone first and Kelly is going to end the session for us tonight differently. So we've got 99 pieces of advice to give to you tonight because it is webinar number 99. I think the team thought I was never going to get 99 pieces, but we've done it. We've pulled them together. So here is my bit of advice with a picture of me on my graduation day 32 years ago now. And my piece of advice was, you know, that theory and practice assignment that you failed, first placement, and it completely devastated you. Well, later on in your career, you're going to base all of your work around your learning from that. So learning from mistakes is always valuable. So there's my bit of advice to my future self. I actually came to the team with this as a suggestion because I did a podcast for Vicky at Social Work Sorted recently, and she asked me this very question: what's the advice to your younger self? And I remember I actually gave a completely different piece of advice in that podcast, some of the kinds of advice that's coming through tonight. But I remember thinking that's a great question, so I thought we'd base a webinar on it. So I went straight back to Vicky at Social Work Sorted and said, do you remember that question that you gave me that really made me think, well, what would you say? And she said, this is my advice to you now. You're not an expert. I know you think you're clever using all those fancy words, but you don't know as much as you think you do. People with lived experience will teach you more than any book or course. Don't be so hard on yourself. Perfect doesn't exist and it never will. Keep on being kind to people, even when you're accused of being too lenient. Everyone deserves kindness, and you know that deep down. So great bit of advice there. We asked so many people, past guests from the webinar. We asked members of our webinar community. Caroline Aldridge, who led webinar 48, whose brand new book, They Died Waiting. You know how much I love Caroline's writing, is out now. I think you can pre-order it. Helen in the chat will be able to tell you. But this is Caroline's advice. You might think you have a career plan, but the path might take you to places that you could never imagine. You might be forging the way, and that can be tricky and even painful. You might follow well-trodden paths. Give yourself permission to follow the path that's right for you. You're only at the beginning. And I hope that everybody that's listening to this can take on some of this amazing practice wisdom that we've pulled together tonight. We've also got Caroline MacDonald, Glasgow Health and Social Care Partnership, who said, I would say, acknowledge your feelings of nervousness, because there are people in the office who feel the same. Hold on to your hope and optimism, because you really can make a positive difference. Form great relationships with social workers who inspire you on a daily basis, because you can learn from their practice wisdom. Stay close to academia, because it keeps you grounded in what you're trying to achieve each day. Finally, be curious, and never stop being curious. It will see you through your social work career with an open mind. We asked Deirdre McKenna, who was a guest on webinar 99, and her advice was listen, listen, listen. We asked Claire Skilleter, who led webinar 24 quite early on in our webinars, on how to manage endings well. And this is what Claire told us. Hold your values close. Check yourself against them frequently. Always seek to understand the feeling behind the behaviour. There is no them and us. Remember, it could be you or your family member that's in receipt of social work services. Believe that you're good enough and try to avoid imposter syndrome. Start self-care from the beginning of your career as a preventative strategy, rather than only using it in a reactive way when you experience a well-being dip. And recognise when it's time to move on to another social work role. You might need to take a little risk, but see where it leads you. You could be surprised. You might see that there's lots of common themes between the advice that's being given, and maybe what you could do tonight is make some notes about, see what you can pull out as being connected themes. We're going to go on though now to a past team member who we invited back for this evening, and Ngozi is going to give you her advice. So Ngozi, do you want to put your mic on and go forth with your advice?
Hello everyone. My advice to my younger self, if I could see my younger self now, would be to be prepared, not just to succeed, but be prepared for failure. Be prepared for ups and downs, because the road is not a smooth one. It's not always smooth. And then be focused, because you might stumble. Be focused. Don't let anything distract you. Don't give up. I never give up. And that's what I will say to my younger self, because there are times that it feels like giving up. And as you come into social work, because I came into it, I wasn't there, I wasn't a social worker. See it as a journey. Life is a journey, and every step you take is a journey. Be positive that you will get to the end of it, no matter what. You might stumble, you might have, distractions or painful experience, but don't give up. What will take you to the end of your journey is determination. That's what leads to success. Because if you're not determined, you can't get there. If you're not prepared, if you lose focus, then you just be where you are and see yourself as a failure, but never see yourself as a failure, because little Ngozi, you can do it. That's what I say to myself, and that's what I say to you. You can do it. Thank you.
Thank you, Ngozi. You're always really inspiring. And I saw in the chat there, Kelly saying it's fabulous to hear your voice. And it is lovely to have you join us again for tonight. And we're hoping there's quite a few past team members joining us. So thank you for that, Ngozi. We're going to keep firing on through with this advice, this amazing practice wisdom that we've pulled together tonight. Eric Banks, who was a guest on webinar 30, said this: be organised, put to-do lists in your online calendar, save phone numbers, plan the week ahead. It'll help you feel on top of things and be structured. Be realistic. Sometimes you'll be dealing with emergencies, which will mean prioritising and compromising on some of your cases. Some young people may not get good enough social work whilst you're giving expectational social work to somebody else. You're only human. You can only do your best. And be kind. Make sure you book leave regularly. Try to have a lunch break. Ask for help from colleagues or from your manager when you need it. Do something kind to yourself, like making a cup of tea or practicing self-care when things are really stressful. Social work is a marathon and not a sprint. Now, our own team members have put their advice throughout the session. Di can't be with us tonight, so I'm going to read out Di's advice. But Di says, follow your heart and your interests. Don't feel forced into a specific area of social work if it doesn't feel right for you. Everyone says that you need child protection frontline experience to progress in your career, but that's not true. So many experienced and talented workers in other areas. If you're interested in an area, you'll struggle. If you're not interested in an area, you'll struggle and you won't enjoy it. And we know that. We know, don't we? Di is recently qualified and is now loving her ASYE year in the place that she wanted to be. So we know we need to find that place you want to be. Now, Di asked Adam Gibson, a social worker in Coventry, and this is what Adam said: if I could give myself one bit of advice to me as a student, it would be this: sit back, enjoy the ride a bit, take the time to go deeper into rabbit holes that you're interested in. You will quickly be doing things because you have to. So right now, take the time to explore. I think that's fabulous advice as well. We asked Farah Khan, principal social worker, who led webinar 64, hopefully looking at social work post-COVID. We were trying to be hopeful at that point. And Farah says, always question what doesn't sit comfortably. Just because it has always been done a certain way, that doesn't mean that it's the right way. We also asked the amazing Florence Smith, who was a guest on our neurodiversity webinar. And Florence says this: I love the photo of Florence. There's some amazing photographs of people in their earlier social work career. And this is when Florence was a newly qualified social worker. And Florence says, with the benefit of hindsight, I would tell newly qualified Florence to embrace and to celebrate her personal difference and to be kinder to herself. As a neurodivergent practitioner, I tried hard to work in standardized ways, which didn't work for me. I failed to put in firm boundaries to support myself and to advocate for my neurosparkliness. The lack of boundaries and the critical inner voice negatively impacted my learning and my practice. As time has gone on, I've embraced my differences, and as a result, I've been kinder to myself in the face of challenges. This has had a positive impact on not just my well-being, but also my practice, my relationship with colleagues, children and families, and my learning and development. I would also tell newly qualified Florence to talk to as many professionals as possible. There's so much that we can learn from other professions which can be translated to social work. And understanding the practices, perspectives, and approaches of partner agencies helps us to understand the network that we're working in, which in turn helps us to support clients better. We asked those of you who come every single week, and Helen comes to our webinars every single week. And this is what Helen says: Helen says, take all the opportunities you're given to develop and grow. There was no Twitter in 2003, which I think is when Helen graduated, where this photo's from. So I couldn't make the connections that I've got now. There was no YouTube, so there was no looking back at these brilliant webinars. So maybe the advice is to do that. Use Twitter, use YouTube, keep up to date with policy and legislation, and join BASWA and be proud of the profession of social work. We also asked Andrew Gambrell, who joined us for the adult learning theory. And Andrew said, I would link my advice to imposter syndrome. I recall watching the experienced workers apparently at ease with juggling multiple crises, wondering and doubting whether I would ever get to that level of knowledge and confidence. What I realised was that an air of confidence didn't come through actual defined knowledge, but a comfort in the knowledge of what problems could be solved and what couldn't. Some of the confidence also came from the back catalogue of similar situations that reassures you that you've got the wherewithal to solve problems at this scale. I don't recall a moment of waking up and thinking, hey, I'm pretty good at this, although I do recall a few false dawns. I think my underlying message is that confidence comes, but it needs the time and experience and an accruing of enough wisdom. So don't fret or doubt, but do be kind to yourself and be comfortable with very slowly getting better. This isn't a linear process. You'll get there. We asked Ian Thomas, who led the amazing webinar, well, jointly with Richard Devine, on the compassionate inquiry into addiction. And this is what Ian told us. Anti-oppressive practice is more than an intellectual activity. Be careful not to make permanent decisions on temporary emotions. We also asked Joe Finch, who's been a guest at so many of our webinars on practice learning, on share, on leading research proposals. So we asked Joe, Professor of Social and Postgraduate Research, Professor of Social Work, it should say there actually. That's my mistyping. And Joe said this, be kind to yourself. It's okay not to know things. It's okay to feel uncertain and at times to feel out of one's depth. We're going to go to our next guest, who is a past team member. You might remember, if you've been coming a long time, Nicola, who was a team member, I think, in seasons 2 and 3, Nicola, I think.
Yep, 2 and 3.
Give us your advice.
Thank you for having me back. So I feel like I wrote to my neurodiverse self, me, and just the social work me. So I wrote, Dear me, nothing can prepare you for what you're about to experience and achieve. Your journey may have many twists and a few crossroads, but this will be an example to you of your passion, your willingness to support others, an opportunity to create healthy boundaries, meet like-minded people, and show you what you're made of. Social work may not always seem social, but remember, each action and interaction counts. From evidencing calls and messages to writing constant reports and assessments. So please don't underestimate the power of your recording skills. Please try to pace yourself and allow yourself to learn. Remain invested and interested despite what you hear and see. Set yourself a personal mission statement and make it your mantra for when things get tough, because they do. Lastly, social work can take you down many paths and be executed in many forms. So stay true to yourself and the profession and make yourself the unique social worker you always intended to be.
Sorry, I'm on mute. I was chatting away to you muted. Thanks for that, Nicola. I always learn so much from you, and it was so good that you could come back and join us tonight. Do you want to tell us about that photograph, just in case, because I know you told us.
That was actually my very first day joining the adolescent team, my first day as a qualified social worker. And the social worker that I met said, you know, it's your first day, you really should create milestones and take a picture of your first day. So I was just undoing my smoothie, trying to log into the computer, and I thought, why not strike a pose? And I think that's kind of the photograph is the essence of how I feel about what you need to do is remain true to yourself, but also, you know, practice all that you've learned as well.
Thanks, Nicola. I think it's also lovely, the advice about recognise the milestones, take those pictures. You know, the picture of my graduation was up in the attic for ages. And it was when I was moving, I pulled it out of the attic and I thought, you know what, I'm going to stick that up actually.
Because actually, while I was writing the letter, I thought there were times when I sat in the car and had to remind myself, you can do this, you want to do this, you can do this. And really it's that confidence and the acting until you feel like a social worker. And I can't say that I even feel like a social worker. I feel like me, but the essence of me is a social worker.
Thank you, Nicola. That was great advice. Thank you so much for that. We're going to go now to Ian, who is always an incredibly inspiring member of our webinar community. And Ian says this: you now have a piece of paper that says you've got a qualification, but that doesn't mean that you need to know everything. The qualification is just the start of the journey. Learn quickly how to network, who you need to ask to work out how to resolve problems. Be comfortable with not knowing things. Critically, remember that the people you work with are the experts on their own lives. Work out how to be flexible and creative enough to provide them with the conditions where they feel able to be open and share their story and their expertise with you. So we're going to hand over now to one of our current team members. Jenna, it's your advice. Would you like to tell us your advice?
Yeah, so my advice to my earlier social work student self, as I'm still a student, I feel that so much pressure comes about when we start to compare our journeys to that of others, from assignment grades to placement responsibilities. Yet at the end of the degree, as we progress to becoming fully qualified, all that matters is our own personal journey. I think throughout my degree, I've hit stages where I've been in a state of comparison. But the biggest thing that I've taken away from this, and the biggest piece of advice that I can give, is find your people. I've never met such an amazing group of like-minded people that I have met on the degree that I'm currently studying. I've learned so much from my friends, and especially now that we've all gone out into the world of placement, we've had that good contrast of gaining an insight into what each of us are doing. I think find that critical friend. Peer supervision is everything. It's invaluable and it carries you through. It's amazing.
And I think it's one of your critical friends, is it, that you asked for a piece of advice?
I did ask a critical friend for some advice. So on the next slide, this is Amanda Kay. So she's studying alongside myself at university. This is my confidant, the bread to my butter. And Amanda says, I would tell my past self to breathe, take it all in, but give yourself plenty of quality breaks for self-care.
Thank you, Jenna, and thank you for sharing your critical friends advice with us as well. We've also got some advice from Natalie, Natalie Wood, who says this: my advice to my younger self would be, your age doesn't define you. It applies equally to younger and older students. The passion you have for your chosen profession does. Don't doubt yourself so much. However, this is what she says she would advise other people to do, is to join book clubs, to do additional training, to listen to seminars, to participate. You might pass your assignments without extra learning, but the people you'll work for, the people accessing services, deserve the best version of you that you can be. I think that's about deeper learning. Take the learning deeper. We've got Melissa, who often joins us in the webinars, who's a student over here where I'm moved to now in Northern Ireland. And Melissa says this: my social work journey is only just beginning, but reflecting back to when I first started my degree, I've not only learned so much, but I've also changed as a person for the better. One key thing I've learned, and I can apply it to so many situations in my life and profession, is this: it's the small things that count. It's so easy to go overload with theories, policies, paperwork, and so on. but just taking the time to put the pen down and listen to people and their lived experiences is the foundation stone of quality social work practice. Never forget the person within the case. We also asked Kaylee Rose Evans, who's been a returning guest to the webinars a number of times. And Kaylee Rose said this: the most important thing to realise is that even the most experienced social workers doubt themselves. They get nervous. They get nervous when they're going for interviews or they're starting a new role. The general rule is 6 months to even start to feel that you're getting to grips with somewhere new. So when you start out and you feel information overload setting in, that's totally normal. Social work is great in that the more you develop your character, the better you will become in every respect, whether that's upholding the rights of others or being someone trustworthy within the office. Things like developing confidence and integrity help both in your work and in your private life. It's also about developing your own identity as a professional, realizing what helps you to feel secure in a workplace and whether you feel you're in the right place for you. Other than that, my advice is try to be present in the moment, whether that's the chance to enjoy the drive to a visit or how interesting it is to speak to people from all walks of life. We've got some advice from Callie Hawkins, who again has joined us many times in the webinars as a mental health social worker. And Callie says, there's no singular route to becoming a social worker. Every route is valid, and your own life experience will provide invaluable resources to helping others. To the younger me, you're going to be amazed at what we achieve for people. It's beyond what we ever dreamt of. Karen Maud, who is, much beloved practice educator and was a guest on our placements webinar, says this: recognize the person at the center of your work. Don't underestimate the importance of kindness and respect towards the people that you're working alongside and your colleagues. Listen to the person rather than jumping in to offer a solution. Karen says social work is a big part of who I am, the values I hold and live by. However, there are times when I've needed to stop being a social worker and be a wife, a daughter, a mother, or a friend. Reflect not only on the challenges and the things that haven't gone well, but also on the things that have gone well. And we're going to move now to another Karen, another inspiring practice educator, in fact, my friend Karen Mosedale. So Karen, do you want to tell us about your advice? And I just love your photo that you sent.
Hello, everybody. Yes, this picture was taken a long time ago now, probably late 1990s, and it's taken on a caving and relief trip to the orphanages in Romania. And the person in purple, looking slightly perplexed with curly hair, is me. And I am looking at those children and I am thinking, what am I seeing here? What on earth am I looking at? I'd never seen anything like it. And it was distressing and it was inspiring. And I think it has stayed with me throughout my career. And that career has taken me to New Zealand, where I met on a training course some people who had been children in the orphanage and were now adults working as care workers in New Zealand. They were quite amazing. And that was a real lesson in how people overcome adversity and become functioning adults in the world, despite their initial circumstances. So what I learned from this, I think what stuck with me was to keep learning, find what it is that makes you passionate and that you want to know more about, and keep following it. Whatever social work throws at you, my best work has been done when my managers have been furious with me. So don't be worried about what your manager thinks. Follow your instincts. And and today, I'm 30 years in, I went into a school today and got really excited about working with some of the children there. So just keep going, it's worth it.
Thank you, Karen. And when you sent me that picture, you said, I think it was in that moment that I decided to become a social worker. And I think it's quite a magic picture that captured the moment when you decided. Literally. Yeah. So it's just there at that time. Amazing. Thank you for that. And I love that. Some of the best social work's been when my managers have been cross at me. That's a real key piece of advice, and we didn't write that on the slide, and that's a brilliant bit of
that's about living with discomfort.
Absolutely. Thank you. Thanks for that, Karen. That was a great bit of advice. So we're moving on now to Leanne Downey, who says, trust your instincts. There's a reason that you've got this degree. If something feels wrong, it probably is. So pay attention to your gut feeling. Believe in yourself. You've got the skills, the knowledge, and the training. Don't let anyone put you down. Pay attention to your emotional well-being and find ways to empty your trauma pot. This is real, and you're dealing with trauma every day. Learn how you empty your pot. Everyone has a different way of dealing with it. Read, get outdoors, dance, spend time with family and friends. Drink wine if you must, only in moderation. Don't be afraid to set boundaries. You can't do everything for everyone, so learn to say no. And then we're over to Dave. Now, Dave, you've not been feeling very well, and you said you might not be up for talking. How's your voice holding up, or do you want me to do it, Dave?
Thank you, but I'm doing okay. Sorry I was late. Yeah, so I think this is the best advice I could come up with from my 4 years so far. The negative voices in your head are just that, voices. Your own self-doubt, we're all human, we all have it. You can control them and make them speak in a positive way. I've not mastered that yet, but you can do it. It can be a hard and arduous road, but you have many, many people who love and believe in you. Believe they know something that you don't, and eventually you'll come to love yourself the way they do. It's a very hard task. It's hard advice to follow, but it's worth it if you can get it right. So,
thank you, Dave. And you asked people on Twitter, didn't you? And so we got these responses on Twitter. I'll read them out for you, Dave, since your throat sounds really sore. But we got these responses. Don't let the bureaucracy bog you down. Remember, you're there to serve and be your authentic self. Came from John Trainer. We had from Joanne Thompson, find humour and use humour. And the next slide is someone who I think has found humour and is using humour in the advice she gives. Chantel Thomas, the anti-racism lead at BASWA, said, when asked what advice would you give your younger self, she said, run for the hills. So I think that's finding the humour. But then she did go on and say, but also you can't pour from an empty vessel. A reminder of the importance of self-care. Sandy Simmons, a practice educator, said this: really listen, not superficially listening just to ask the next question, but really listen. Stay curious a bit longer. Invest time in reflection. You're going to thank yourself for it in the long run. Tread carefully in people's lives. Take time to walk alongside them. Prioritize time for yourself, doing things or being with people that bring you joy. And finally, when you get the chance to train as a coach, take it. It's going to really enhance your practice. Richard Devine, a returning guest who is always amazing, says this: your intention matters. As a newly qualified social worker, you can easily feel anxious or insecure about your level of skill, competence, and confidence. In my experience, however, what children and families seem to value most is someone who's willing to listen and attempt to understand their thoughts, feelings, and experiences. You can adopt this attitude irrespective of your experience or level of skill or training. It helps reduce resistance, cultivates trust, and facilitates compassion for a parent, compassion even for behaviour that might be harming them or others. It's possible to empathise with the parent's difficulties and hold on to the child's experiences simultaneously. Sarah Jane, who led an amazing webinar on trauma, says, this isn't a photo of me, but it's a screenshot that reminds me of the roads I had to first locate and then walk down many times. A reminder from my younger social work self that we don't always know the destination, but if we're committed, we use the resources available to us, and we know that we don't have all the answers, we can work towards finding out together. Sophie, a social worker working with children who are sexually exploited, says this: be clear and boundaried, but supportive from the start with families, professionals, and your managers. You genuinely can't help others if you're so burnt out that you must be boundaried to look after yourself so you can stay in this job long term and continue to support people. Be kind and compassionate and respectful to everyone you work with, including yourself. Recognise and reflect on the parts of the job that you love. things you would like to change, and the things that cause a fight, flight, or freeze response in you and your practice. Talk about these with your supervisors. Soyeb, who led our session a couple of weeks ago, says, remain humble. Remember your roots and why you came into social work. A past team member, Mary Carter, who also worked with me on the book Insiders Outsiders about care experienced social workers, says a couple of points to my younger self. Whatever you do for the world out there, do just as much for yourself internally. And you don't have to work so hard to be liked or be loved. Just relax, kid. Allow life to come to you. Diana, one of our previous team members, I think I'll read Diana's out. Diana said to us, push yourself to find the opportunities and moments where you can grow, but also push yourself to place your mental health first. David Anderson says, please don't try and fit in by changing who you are. It's your unique perspective on life, allied to your well-earned qualification, that will see you grow into the role, not by changing your clothes or your convictions to suit other people. However, change is constant to social work. So social workers must be ready to go and do their best wherever the wind may carry them. And that's why there's the red balloons picture. And we're going to go straight through to Chris. What's your advice, Chris?
Just trying to find my unmute button, sorry. So my advice really is actually just really simple. Don't panic. A lot of the time when we're working, things can feel really stressful and they can feel out of control. But, you know, if we just give ourselves a minute to think about what we can do, what we can change, what we can't change, the things that we can influence, not everything is in our scope to give or to do. So we're best focusing our attention where it is most needed. It's pretty simple, really. And I asked my student, who is here, for her advice, and this is what she told us. So Annie's a second-year student, and the advice that she would give her past self would be to look after herself and not to stress. Enjoy every moment of the training and be a sponge. Soak up all the information and advice given, but above all, remember human rights. I love that advice.
Thank you, Chris. I love the fact you're now a practice educator, and when we started this, you were a student. That's why we've done 99 webinars now. Jen says, I'd say make sure you include yourself in the list of people you're kind to. Often we find our own needs at the bottom of a very large pile. If we don't find time for self-reflection and healing, me time, we won't be much use to others for very long. Victoria, who is a really important part of our webinar community, says, no one's going to thank you for overworking. Never feel guilty about leaving on time or taking holidays. If the organisation you're working in has an unhealthy culture, leave it. Don't wait for it to get better. As a social worker, you've got so many transferable skills. Although you might not believe it, toxic cultures don't change quickly. Never forget the power that you have in relation to the people that you work with, even if you feel powerless within the organisation you work in. Never, ever make promises to people that you visit on the spot. Go back to the office or your desk, discuss, think, plan. Make sure you can do what you say you'll do. Don't be late. Time is respect. When it's unavoidable, tell people you're running late. It's not hard, but it is to be remembered. Wayne Reed tells us, be resilient. Use your passion to fuel your determination. Utilize the advice that you get. Don't be afraid to ask questions. Recognize the compatibility of personalities. It will help you develop effective relationships. Know your own rights and assert them. Do your homework. Be prepared and be proactive. Geeks prosper. Don't dwell on the negativity of discrimination. Maximize any opportunities for positive discrimination. Be self-aware and recognize the ways you can be easily labeled, stereotyped, and categorized, as well as your own inescapable racial lens. Don't be deterred by rejection, mishaps, mistakes, and misfortune, because they're good learning opportunities. Always seek feedback and consider how you might do things differently next time. Be authentic and stay true to yourself. Natalie Harris tells us, if I had the opportunity, I'd tell myself, I know you're worried you're not going to be resilient enough to be a social worker because you're care experienced, but stop worrying about that. As a social worker in the future, that will be one of your biggest strengths when relating to and advocating for children, young people and their families. Claire Bevan, whose photo is brilliant, says people will always remember your kindness as well as your words. You can't do it all. Do what you can and do it well with your words and your kindness. Karen Wright, who I knew as a student, is now 7 years qualified, says, enjoy the journey. Don't be in too much of a rush to progress. You need to bed in your practice and build resilience to remain able to support people when they're at the toughest point in their life. Progressing through to a higher band will come with time and experience, but you need to walk before you can run. Good luck, Karen. An anonymous piece of advice came in. My advice would be find the serenity to accept what you cannot change, the courage to change the things you can, and the wisdom to know the difference, which is the Serenity Prayer from AA. And now we've got John Sturgeon with his advice, and he's got a completely different slide. So do you want to tell us a bit about this, John?
Yes, I do, Siobhan. Thank you very much. It's just wonderful to be here tonight and to just look back. I've been conscious, I've been looking back more than I've been looking forward. So maybe I'm into Erickson's final reckoning of ego integrity versus despair when I evaluate my life. These are two images, artist's impressions of me. The one on the left was drawn in 1989, 1 year after I qualified. And the one on the right was drawn in 2017. And there's a story behind both of them. I imagine the two having a discussion. And I think my younger self would be astonished at what was going to lie ahead for him. The younger self was practicing in Wick in the far northeast of Scotland. And myself now, I'm down in Dumfries. And during that 34 years, I've passed through different stages of practice. And I've ended up working at a university. But what my younger self would be astonished with most of all, because they would still be smarting from having failed their higher French at 18, is that the guy on the right was doing a presentation in French to a group of French social workers. You never know where you're going to end up. You get one qualification, but it's such a golden ticket. So what would I advise? I would tell my younger self that I'm glad that I've always worked in the countryside, where you live amongst your service users and you get to know them and they know where you live and they know where to find you. And the wonderful thing in the countryside is you meet them again and again and again and you get to find out what happened in the end. And that's wonderful. I would tell them I wish I had attended events like this rather than being cut off in a little rural corner. But we have these things now. So I would be with Helen, who said YouTube, Twitter, BASWA. I would be all of these things now. What I would say, though, is, and nobody's really said this, we've talked a bit about self-care. The social work I went into in 1988 with my 1 year qualification, CQSW, it was a very different world. And the world that social workers are going into now is much more complex, much more technical, much more demanding. And you can only absorb other people's stress for so long before you need to take a pause, take a break. And the statistics of people dropping out after a short period of time are not good. We've had a lot of advice to look after yourself, and I would echo that. But I'm going to say something that's a bit odd, maybe a bit really out there. Nobody's went close to this. Is when you get your first pay packet, go and get some financial advice so that you can get money aside, so that if you need to take a break, you can come out and you can travel, you can do some VSO, you can recharge your batteries and come back in. And I think employers are maybe going to have to get on board with something like that so that they can keep their staff and they can keep their staff fresh for longer. And someone else said, you've got massive skills as a social worker. So if you have to come right out for a time, there's plenty of things you can do, but go back in and re-engage. The photo on the left, I got an email the other day from the sister of the boy who drew this in 1989. And what she said to me was, John, I hope you don't mind getting in touch with you. And I hope you remember me. Of course I remembered her. She was 3 at the time, and she's 36 now. And she said, John, I want to thank you for finding such a lovely family for me and my brother when I was 3 and my brother was 5. So we're going to have difficult days. We're going to have boring meetings. We're going to feel anxious. We're going to be scared. We're going to be doing so much admin we can't think. But that's what it's all about. It's about people and helping people and saving people's lives sometimes.
That was beautiful, beautiful advice, John. And I'm so glad that you sent us a completely different slide. And I was thinking, how am I going to fit this in? Oh, I'll just put it on the slide. And I'm so glad, because what a lovely story about that picture. Just really gave me goosebumps, that did. So thank you. We're about halfway through, and that was just amazing advice. So thank you so much for that, John. Okay, we need to be whizzing through because we're only at number 51, aren't we? So David Christian via Twitter says this: remember that you do make a difference. The small changes that you support people to make can make a big difference, but you might not see it for a while. Maybe you won't see it for 30 years until someone contacts you, like John's picture. Remember, we're all people and we're all service users. It's just that we're in a better place today to support those who might need to support us tomorrow. My slides aren't moving. Jackie Hooley also via Twitter said, my advice to my younger social work self would be to go on more team nights out. Social workers can be fun too. Kultuma, do you want to tell us your bit of advice?
Yep, so my advice to a younger self, so pre-qualifying, would be don't give up or lose hope. And that was because I nearly did give up in my first year, but so glad I didn't. And it is a tough journey. I'm not going to lie to you. It's a tough journey, but it's so worth it in the end. So that was an advice to myself. And I also asked one of our regular attendees, Saeed, for some advice for his younger self as well. And Saeed said, don't forget to take care of yourself. When I moved into the professional field after completing my graduation in social work, I found the social work profession more difficult than I imagined. Ups and downs are part of life of social workers, are human beings first, and face all the situations of life. Therefore, you should also take care of yourself and be ready to face things at all times. You should take care of your physical, mental health, and watch out for what you feel. Your feelings are so much important. If you are fit and feel good, you will be able to help others. You are very important. Your feelings are so important. Therefore, don't forget and neglect yourself. Be sure to take care of yourself.
Thank you, Kultuma. And I'm so glad that Saeed gave us that advice, because Saeed joins us every week from Pakistan, doesn't he? And when we had the graduation that we did, the virtual graduation, and all of his class joined in, it was just amazing. It was so lovely, and it made us feel part of an international social work community. So I'm so glad that Saeed was able to send us the advice tonight. We've also got Helen, who says, reflection, reflection, reflection. Make time for it. Be true to your values. Listen to hear. Believe in yourself and be kind. And it includes yourself too. We also had this bit of advice. The bad days aren't that bad, but conversely, the good days aren't that good. Not really sure what that means, but that was from David Bulmer via Twitter. We thought we needed to include it because it might throw, a bit of humour into the evening. Lauren Tabor also via Twitter says, you don't have to know it all. You're not less of a social worker if you don't know, and you need to ask and reflect. Be comfortable with uncertainty. Another one from Twitter, Rachel, says, pause, listen, reflect on what you're not hearing. Silence is a positive tool. Recognize what is realistic, even when others around you are asking the unrealistic. Be strong. Say no when you need to and yes when you can. Social work is an amazing profession. Alison via Twitter too says, learn to trust your gut, not just with casework, but with employers too. If something doesn't feel right, it normally isn't. Learn to say no, to set boundaries. Saying yes to everything you're being asked to do more could be flattering early in your career. When they say, oh, but you're so wonderful, but it can easily burn you out. Liz Howard from Basware says, you are entering an incredible profession. Don't forget all about the code of ethics when you qualify. It's there to guide and support your practice and inform your professional judgments. It will be one of your best and most reliable social work companions. And now I've got to tell you about Professor Mohammed from Egypt, who joins us sometimes in our webinars, who sent us an amazing piece of advice, in fact, a whole assignment of advice, and we'd be happy to send that out to people. He put us some images because he knows that we like to use imagery in our slides, which he knows that helps sometimes students who come to our sessions or watch back on YouTube who don't use English as a first language. And this is what he says. Specify according to your talents and capabilities, so specialise according to what you're interested in. Know the customs and the traditions in the society in which you practice. Take care of your professional relationships with clients and colleagues. Assess the needs and challenges in the community where you work. Maintain confidentiality of all information and data related to work. Maintain professionalism at all times. Examine and keep up to date with recent trends in social work. Participate in local and international professional groups. Pay attention to ethical charters and celebrate your professional field. I've got to tell you really how much we appreciate the advice that's been sent to us from our international colleagues, and the amount of work that's gone into that as well, and the translation of that for us is amazing. And I think, you know, what Professor has done there for us is really good. And we'll, when Kultuma does the follow-up email, I think we'll probably try and include all of that advice in there because there's such a lot of work that went into that. Lisa via Twitter, who started at 22 and has had 22 years since, says, listen to your instinct, strive to uphold the values and ethics that took you on this path, reflect and keep learning, always be aware of the power your role holds, do your best, but don't forget to look after yourself too. Alicia, a newly qualified worker, says throw yourself into any and all opportunities that you're offered when you're at university. They've all got some transferable skills that are going to help you in your future job. Now, I love this one. If people know Trevor, then this is a picture of when Trevor graduated. Amazing picture. I think you could try and even date it by the haircut really there, couldn't you? Those of us who are a bit older, I don't know, I think Trevor might have a CQSW as well, looking at that haircut. It was very CQSW friendly at that time, that kind of haircut. But anyway, Trevor's advice to himself was, you can only be yourself as a social worker. There's no such thing as a generic social worker, no uniform but your own. It's you as a social worker. Brett, I'm going to hand over to you. Brett, you pulled so much of this advice together and put the slides together, so thank you for that. But do you want to give us your advice, Brett?
Yeah, so something that's sort of been drilled into me from the start of my degree is to question everything, or as we say in social work, have professional curiosity. So just some examples I've thought of over the last sort of few days. I mean, if you used to have like a service user with dementia that's displaying certain behaviors at a certain time of day, why are they? Or if you have like a looked after child who's going through multiple foster placements, why? I mean, there's obviously a behavior there. And even if like assessments or interventions aren't going well, why aren't they going well? And then if they are, why are they going well, and can that be replicated? And then things like substance use and eating disorders. I mean, these are all behaviors that have, you know, a need and a want behind them, and you can't find out what that is unless you're asking why.
Thank you, Brett. And you also asked your tutor at uni, didn't you?
I did.
So here's yours.
So this is Greta, this is my personal tutor at Queen's, and she says, I think I would advise my younger self not to be afraid to challenge processes that do not provide the support to people that they were put in place to do. Essentially, to remember that social work is relationship based and about the people we work with, not the processes. I would also remind my younger self that self-care is very important in social work, and to take time to rest, rejuvenate and replenish. Finally, I would recommend that if a particular social work role in a particular agency setting is not fulfilling you professionally, then don't be afraid to make a change to something else. That's the beauty of social work. There's so much variety.
Thank you, Brett. Thank you very much for that. And we'll keep moving on through Esther, who's been 25 years qualified. And Esther said, don't be scared of people dying. It's a natural part of life. Support them and their families to live until they die. Cecile Saunders, I think that was a really important piece of advice for Esther. Make sure your case notes are detailed and up to date. And there are progress opportunities now in social work. Go through it and get to where you want to get to. We've also got some advice from Robert Strachan, who's at the University of Bradford, head of department, and he says, don't force yourself into one branch of social work. Keep your options open. And then we're going on to our final guest of the night, Sally Ann. So Sally Ann, do you want to tell us your advice?
Sure, thank you. Thank you for having me. So I too have a CQSW, and this is a picture in the summer of 1989 in the last week of my placement with Elsie. I can remember her name. And this was a daycare provision for elderly and frail people with dementia. And in that photo, I have very dark hair, which I certainly don't have now, which is what 33 years of social work does for you. But I'm also smiling, and I think I still have that smile. What I didn't know was that round the corner for me, going into children's services, was probably one of the most difficult 2-year periods in my life. And the thing that got me through that were the people I met. It was the other social workers. It was the people that I became friends with, some of whom are still friends now. And it wasn't just about self-care. At that period in my life, I needed other people to dust me down and hold me up and keep me going through those really difficult and challenging times that all of us experience one way or another in our jobs. And ever since, those people are still with me. I still see some of the people from that period of my life. And in every job I've had since, including my job now, there are people, and they're my people, that hold me up and I hold them up. And that for me has been such an important part of being a social worker. And find your people is not just about that critical challenge and that professional challenge. It is about the people who will hold you. And given the jobs that we have, the risk, the care, the challenge, the relationships that we must make with others must include people that can hold us. So that would be my advice. Find your people. Thank you.
Thank you, Sally. It's a beautiful picture as well. And I think really the stories that we're getting from the CQSW group tonight, amazing. So thank you so much for that, Sally Ann. Okay, we'll go on to our next piece of advice, which comes from Bex Welsh, social worker, who says that you can't fix everything and don't set out trying to. Instead, focus on a small number of outcomes. You'll never be up to date with all your work, and it's unrealistic to think you will be. Really try not to focus on what you haven't done, but instead focus on what you have done. Otherwise, you can end up feeling inadequate and an imposter. You need your teammates more than anyone, and you need to create a safe space to share things with colleagues. Jack Skinner, who qualified in 2014, tells us this: push yourself outside your comfort zone, apply for different jobs, things that grab your interest or things that you might not get another chance to do. Your first few qualified years are great for exploring the many different worlds that social workers inhabit. Jack says, I did this a little, but I really regret not trying out different roles a bit more. You almost certainly won't regret it, and someone at some point will be very grateful for your rich and varied experience. Danielle Buck, who's a student at the University of Hull, says this: I would suggest make sure you've got sufficient knowledge in poverty and how it forms the basis of social work. I was incredibly naive into how much of an issue this portrays on families and children up until we developed a further understanding into sociological imagination. My advice would be ask as many questions as you can. Really take the opportunity within your cohort to ask fellow students their stories and know that your cohort is a safe space. Familiarise yourself with theory, especially theory and practice. Further advice would be to really manage your time effectively. There's lots and lots and lots of reading and work to be doing. It's also useful for your placement. I've learned that you're going to need to really prepare yourself for placement. And when that does come around, and it comes around fast, as in the experience, university cannot fully prepare you for some of the challenges that you might face. And my last little bit of advice would be make your lifelong friends and really enjoy the experience. And then we've got our very own, oh no, we've not. I thought we were going to Becky, but we're not. We've got John Hislop first. And John says this: in my early days of motorcycling and gardening, I wished we'd got a picture of John doing motorcycling and gardening, maybe at the same time, but we didn't. I was on the receiving end of lots of poor advice. It often seemed to be more about people's need to position themselves as experts rather than a desire to actually help. So one piece of meta advice that I would choose would be choose the person that you ask for advice and take any advice you're offered proactively with a pinch of salt. Nevertheless, I'm happy to offer 2 things I wish I'd believed earlier. Number 1, enjoy the unstructured time that you get to spend with clients during the early stages of your career. As you get more expensive, better paid, time with others gets more structured, more pressured, and can eventually get crowded out altogether. And look after yourself. Even if you believe in self-sacrifice, if you don't look after yourself, you won't be around to help anyone else. From my point of view, ethics is all about the mutual pursuit of the good life. So self-sacrifice is out. But as a pluralist, I can respect the views of others. There's John Hislop's advice. And now it is our very own Becky. Becky, do you want to give your advice?
Yeah, okay. Mine's a little bit different, not so much about the self-care, but I think one of the biggest jumps I found was about taking the time to really explain the different processes to the families that you support. Obviously, you jump straight from academic into sort of newly qualified, and you've got all these things to remember, and it's easy to forget that, you know, you've really got to find a way to deliver information in a friendly and empathic way, because you shouldn't assume that families know or understand what is happening to them. So I would just keep reminding myself to revisit it and appreciate that the information that you're relaying is scary, it's life-changing, and it's hard to hear. So just to always put yourself in their position, like how would you like to be spoken to, reassured or supported? And there's no one size fits all, so adapt and personalise to each family and their situation. And I think we're moving on to my friend Wayne, who I got to know through lockdown. He's now a newly qualified, doing his AYSE year in Birmingham. And his advice was, the fire you have in your belly will be put in the right place. Don't worry about the right path you should follow, because as long as you stick to your own, you will find your calling. Don't be worried or guilty about setting your own boundaries, because you're going to need them to balance your energy. You don't have to have it all figured out now, and you can change your path, plans and dreams.
Thank you. Then we've got somebody else talking about, Rebecca telling us about how important it is to be kind to yourself. Self-care is important, especially in social work. I love Kate's photo that she sent to us and also her advice. I didn't set these boundaries to offend you or to please you. I did it to manage the priorities and the goals that I have set for my life, and because I am worth investing in. Love that bit of advice. And then Tony Lee, our very own team member, over to you. Are you there, Tony Lee?
Yeah. Oh, yes, I am. Sorry, I was just doing the tweets. My advice to my younger social work self would be to not rush and to have everything figured out. Social work is all about change and adapting. So I would remind myself to have an open mind with everything I'm faced with, including the social work sector I want to get into. I would also remind myself that relationships are everything in this field. So be sure to constantly work on ways to build good relationships, both with professionals and others and clients. And I got a piece of advice from my best friend who's still a student, but she's in her 3rd year. And she said that she would tell herself to read more so that she could understand the content and the vocabulary used. She'd also tell her younger social work self to be easy on herself and to not put too much pressure on herself, especially on placement, and to take each day as it comes.
Thank you. Fabulous. Thank you for that, Tony Lee. Sorry, I interrupted the tweeting there. You carry on tweeting, and we'll go to our next piece of advice from Adoronke, who says, my advice to my younger self is to remain my authentic self whilst recognizing the intersectionality of my identity. Amy, a newly qualified social worker in children's services, tells us, seek opportunities wherever you can and make the most of anything that's offered. Even if it doesn't seem like it's relevant to what you're doing at the time, it might be helpful later on. So take any learning and shadowing that you can. Be the social worker that you would want to have. Someone once said to me that you learn more about yourself than anything else during your social work training. I didn't know what that meant until the end, but it's so true. So try and embrace it. You might hear things about yourself which you didn't know or that could be hard to hear, but use it all as an opportunity to develop yourself, which will then help you to become a reflective, empathic, and emotionally intelligent practitioner. Be honest in communication. If you're struggling, ask for help. Make use of supervision time. It's a two-way process. Enjoy the journey. It can get tough, but remember, we are all always learning. So we go from a newly qualified worker in children's to an experienced team manager in adults. Shabnam Ahmed, School of Shab's YouTube channel. Shabnam says, trust your instincts more, your judgments, be brave, be bold, be creative. The world needs it. Why wait? That's fabulous, isn't it? The world needs it. Why wait? Maggie Jackson says to us that to her younger self, she would say, I remember feeling with my very first case that I knew nothing and I wasn't ready to be the one in charge. But I think what I would say, what I would most want to say is, you'll never feel that you know enough. So keep involved in new learning. And if you begin to feel as if you know exactly what you're doing, that's the point that you've forgotten that the work is about other people and not about you. Fabulous bit of advice there, isn't it? We've also got Deb Solomon joined us in webinar 89 about neurodiversity. My advice to my younger self, okay, it would be, don't be afraid to bring your whole self to work. We're allowed to be human. We're allowed not to understand something. We're allowed to ask questions and we're allowed to care about ourselves. We never stop learning, and we as human beings are all wonderfully diverse. Embrace that. And don't try to be everyone else. Be you and put the chocolate down. I wish someone had said this to me when I first started. There's so much pressure on new social workers to be this unobtainable, perfect worker. I now understand that this doesn't exist. And even the most experienced social worker is still learning, still questioning, still wondering about their decisions. But the day that we stop asking is the day we should leave the profession. It's okay not to be perfect. We also went to Rob Mitchell, another principal social worker, who said this. My advice to new social workers would be to do everything possible to surround yourselves throughout your career with social work colleagues who have the right values. Sometimes it means changing jobs, employers, and even taking sideways steps. However, in my experience, finding inspiration from other colleagues, spending time with students and new workers, working closely with those whose values burn brightly, and learning from those you respect is the best way to combat burnout and help keep the spark that brought you into social work alive and well. Helen Franklin, who joined us in webinar 20, says, being a social worker is so much more than just a job visiting people to fill in an assessment form and access services for them. Value the person, see the bigger picture and challenge their oppression. Acknowledge and respect the privilege that's afforded to you as the professional at a crisis point in people's lives. Georgina, a senior social worker in adult services, says, as practitioners, every life we touch teaches us and reminds us how nebulous the concept of expert practitioner is. Recognise that we don't have to focus on striving to be the best, but instead strive to do our best. Be prepared to learn from every experience, to never stop learning, to be humbled by the stories that we hear and to accept the mistakes that are made, to be humbled when we can only stand by with feelings of futility. Enjoy the wisdom that that brings. Be kind to ourselves when many others won't be. Harness your resilience. Accept that we may never be experts in the way that other professionals might be. Rather than striving for perfection, instead ride the wave of life's imperfections. Celebrate the fact that sometimes doing our best is enough, that the journey in itself can be valid as the destination. Share your inherent care for others with your vulnerable self. Anna says, I'd advise my younger social work self to find a method for how to manage those times that work thoughts keep you awake in the small hours. Remember that you can't tame the beast. That's something that my final year practice educator said to me. She was quite right though. Trying to tame the work beast is probably a route to overwork and unhappiness. Helen Wheat by Twitter says, don't listen to people telling you that you've got to work in frontline services to be a social worker. Do what motivates you and think about where your unique talents lie. Be your authentic self and you will be the best social worker that you can be. Our very own team member Kat is up next. Kat, tell us your advice with your lovely graduation picture there.
My advice is that the little wins make a massive difference, and so don't put so much pressure on yourself, because that's something that I definitely did in the earlier days.
Thank you, Kat. And I know you're not very well, but are you able to read the advice?
Yeah, that's fine. I'll try not to, I'll keep up. Sorry for everyone for my voice. So my colleague Naomi, her advice is, first, be gentle, kind and patient with absolutely everyone, but start with yourself. Second, count up every single reason there is to be hopeful, no matter how small, and celebrate them every single day. Third, don't work towards an outcome measure, aim to be with people and next to them. Trust that this will lead in the right direction. And fourth, practice forgiving yourself for not being perfect and not making everything better over and over again. And when she sent me that advice, she said the fourth point was for me. So I'm trying to practice that.
Fabulous.
Thank you.
Thank you. It's funny, isn't it, how we ask people for one piece of advice and we get loads of advice from people. And actually the next person, Vivian Akosi Torrado, who led our webinar on diversity and won the Social Worker of the Year Awards in 2021, sent us all of this advice. And it made me think maybe you have to give loads of advice to become Social Worker of the Year, perhaps, I don't know. But this is what Vivian said. Be true to myself and inner will, including the motive for practice. Not to copy negative work ethics from other professionals, to maintain positivity and not to be discouraged by how colleagues in the profession will treat you for your different perspective, to not catastrophize the negative, unpalatable events that will inadvertently happen to me during my professional life, to use each event as a learning curve, to understand that life isn't fair and equitable, hence not to compare myself with others, to understand that discrimination, racism is real, and I may not get to where I wish to get to because of the colour of my skin, that climbing the ladder would be much more difficult because of the colour of my skin, amongst other things, but to remain steadfast, to be focused and relentless in my resolve to do positive things in the world, to be kind and caring, to try not to be a saviour in practice, but instead do little changes in my corner, which can go a long way, and to be confident and believe in myself. Julie Lusk via Twitter says, be yourself. You've come into this career knowing that you've got something to give. So I suppose I would add, so give it. That's what we've got. That's what we come into it with. Cara Jackson, a newly qualified social worker, says, the advice I'd give to my younger self as a social worker would be to remain calm and accept that I cannot fix every situation. As I've progressed in my role, I've learned that not every situation requires a response. Sometimes things happen that are out of my control. I've learned to challenge other professionals and to ensure that everybody is taking responsibility to safeguard the people that we work with. Got Debbie Davis, a second-year student, who says, if I went back to my younger self as a mature student, I'd say this: don't be a rabbit caught in the lights. You'll grow further with knowledge and experience like an oak tree through the continual lessons of life. An anonymous newly qualified social worker said, don't be afraid to ask questions and speak up if you don't feel confident about something. And tonight, because of Kai's advice to his younger self, he opened our session up. And everybody who comes to our webinars regularly knows that normally Kelly opens the webinars. So Kelly's going to close tonight with the 98th and 99th piece of advice. Did you think we were going to get through 99 webinars, 99 pieces of advice? Over to you, Kelly.
Hi. So I just put in the chat that lots of people were saying how brilliant tonight is. And I put in the chat that a lot of the team were a little bit dubious about whether we could get 99 pieces of advice, but Siobhan's crazy ideas always work, and we have done it. But my advice to myself would be to take things in your own time and just keep going. So as a newly qualified social worker, I honestly didn't think I'd get to this point. So it's my 4th attempt at trying to get a degree, not in social work, but my 4th attempt at trying to get a degree and getting a little bit further each time. So starting when I was 19 with trying to study and not really being able to do it, and then qualifying at 40. Really kind of, I didn't think it would take me that long, and I didn't think I would get to the end of it, but I actually did it, and kind of, you know, all the way through that thinking, why can't I do it? What's going on? Should I not even bother? But kind of, you know, just keep going. That would be my advice to myself. Just keep going and do things in your own time. Don't compare yourself to anybody. And I think, you know, lots of things on the way. If you've watched other webinars that I've been part of, you know, diagnosis of ADHD and dyscalculia and family stuff, it's not for you to compare yourself to anybody else. It's for you to do the best that you can possibly do. And that's my advice to myself. And then the next one is some advice that I got from Professor Ray Jones. Ray Jones was somebody that I used a lot of his books while studying. So his advice is, it took me a couple of years post-qualifying to have the competence and confidence to tackle all the issues and tasks which came my way as a social worker. It's an experience which reinforces for me the importance of wise supervision and supportive colleagues and team. So when applying for a post, interview those whom you may be working with, as well as being interviewed by them. So what can they offer you instead of just what can you offer them? And I think on his email, Ray said that he qualified in 1972, I think. And he's currently leading the care review in Northern Ireland. So I think that's really, really good advice. And can I just say as well, Siobhan, that we are still taking submissions for the neurodivergent social workers book that we're planning on compiling and editing. There is a poster out there that's on Twitter, and Dave's done a brilliant job of sharing that. It does say submissions close on the 31st of October. We always knew we weren't going to hit that. And if you have two neurodivergent social workers working together, you know you're probably not going to hit the deadline that you've set for yourself. But I did one better and forgot to actually share that the deadline has been extended. So if anybody is wanting to submit a piece for that, have a look on Twitter. We'll share it again tonight, but there's still time to do that, and that'd be brilliant. Yep, so back over to you, Siobhan.
Thank you, Kelly. That could be our advice to your younger social work self. Make sure you get that book done in the future. That's going to be this amazing book that's going to help people recognise how it can take 4 times, but you're going to get there and you're going to do it brilliantly. Thank you so much. And I want to say a special thank. The whole team is amazing, but for this week, I want to say a special thanks to Brett, who really helped me out with this, because it was a big task pulling together 99 pieces into the slides. And I do think the team sometimes look at me as though, what on earth is she on about now? I said, for number 99, we've just got to get 99 pieces of advice. That's all right. And it's been tricky, but Brett's pulled so much of this together, and Chris too. So thank you so much, everybody in the team, but particularly Brett and Chris for this week. So we will see you next week for our all kind of hugely emotional final farewell webinar. But in between times, just so that you know, as a team, we will be at the Social Worker of the Year Awards on Friday. So we might be tweeting about our experiences on Friday. But next week, we will see you for our very final webinar. Thank you so much to our special guests for tonight. I think it was fabulous having Karen and Sally Ann and John, and John's picture was just a magical moment tonight. So thank you to our guests and to our returning our returning team members too. It's been lovely to see you, and we hope that you'll all join us for our very final webinar next week. Thank you so much, everybody, and good night. Bye. Bye, everybody.